Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about, one of the questions I get sometimes, and people are like, hey, pull-ups versus rows, which one is better? And to me, it's in a way a bit of a silly question because they're quite different exercises, even though they work the same general muscles. So it really shouldn't be an either or. It should be unless you have a good reason not to, it's not a bad idea to include both, right? To a greater or lesser extent. Now, I'll be the first to say that depending upon, specific weak links, what you're working on, there might be reasons why you would want to focus on one more than the other. There could be range of motion issues. There could be injuries that prevent you from doing one versus the other, and that's okay. Those are exceptions to rules, and we don't make just universal rules that always apply with no exceptions. Those can be very, very obvious exceptions. The other thing could be the overall balance of your program, right? And then that's something else that we have to factor in, and also goals of your program. But if we're looking at just basic balanced musculature and a well-developed back, I think it can be wise to include both. And now for people who aren't strong enough to do pull-ups, people say, well, they could do lat pull-downs. Well, yeah, and I don't disagree with that either. Although I think in that case, most people who, aren't strong enough to do pull-ups yet, oftentimes I'll just prescribe more rowing until they are strong enough to do it, right? Because the rows can build the pull-ups. But we can certainly do assisted pull-ups, reverse band pull-ups. People can do lat pull-downs, things if they need that movement in there. And I don't think that's a problem, right? It's just tools in our toolbox. Although there is something to be said for a dead hang pull-up. Certainly something to be said for overall back development. And again, there's its own whole culture around body weight movements and calisthenics, and I don't think that's a bad thing as long as people don't see that as the only tool or the best tool. Right? We shouldn't be dogmatic in our approach. Use different tools in the toolbox for the right purpose and understand that they have their place. Right? Don't get married to a specific exercise. Now, that being said, kind of what are the differences? And in this, I'm just going to discuss, say, like a bent over row like I'm doing here, or potentially a barbell row off the floor, which is a traditional barbell row. I'm going to discuss those versus say, a pull-up here, rather than get into all the other row variations, even ones that I've personally used on camera and like, because these are kind of the basic movements, right, rather than looking at other variations. Which again, don't get me wrong, those can all have their place. Those can be valuable tools in our toolbox, right? But these are our simplest formats. So what does the pull-up work? Our entire middle back. Now, does it work the upper back? Yes, to a lesser extent. It can work posterior delts, upper traps, all those things, rhomboids. It can work all those things. Although, it tends to work them better with a somewhat wider grip. Right? But it does work all the things, but really where it shines is going to be a little bit more in your arms and especially in your lats, right? Because of that vertical pull, most of the data that looks at even bicep activity, even though we may not be doing these movements as, our most important bicep builders, most guys are going to do some curls or at least chin-ups if they really care about biceps. And again, nothing wrong with that. Use the right tool. Use the right tool in your toolbox. See how that works? But I do want to make that clear. The data does demonstrate that vertical pulling like this, even with a pronated grip, tends to work the biceps better. Right? It does tend to work the biceps better than rowing does. Definitely tends to work lats a little bit better on a set per set, rep for rep basis. Does that mean you can't build massive lats with rows? No, it does not mean that. We're talking about, again, each individual rep, each individual set. It brings a lot to the lats, right? Particularly the lower portion of the lats, even the lower traps and things to some extent. Pull-ups are a staple there. Plus, they can help with a lot of things with scapular mobility, right? And some of that can carry over to other movements we're doing. But really, yeah, that ability to get into a deep, deeper stretch at the bottom, really spread those scapula apart, does bring something to the table that's a little harder to achieve with a row. Not saying impossible, just more difficult. Again, look at your tools that way. Okay. Plus, we've also got to look at the athletic component of it, training you to move your body through space. Rows, on the other hand, they do work the low back more. The little bit of isometrics for the posterior chain, the erectors, all of that, if we're doing a standing version. All right, that aside, what do they work better? Upper back. They're going to tend to hit things like your posterior delts, your mid traps, upper traps, things like that better. I go so far as to say that for overall trap development, now I'm not talking about just one part of the trap, overall trap development, when we think about all three parts balanced, I'm going to say rowing is arguably the best thing you can do for it. Again, note I didn't say that that's all any person would ever need. Again, we're not making that claim. Got to throw those disclaimers in. Rows bring a lot to the table there. Now, occasionally people will come up and say, well, what if I'm doing other exercises for those? And let's say, what if my lats aren't getting enough work, but I do a lot of upright rows and I do lateral raises? Are my shoulders and upper back being hit pretty hard? Well, if your volume is sufficiently high there, I think that's a fair point. And in that case, it would make sense for a person to focus more on pull-ups. Right? Why? Well, because your upper back is getting a lot of work, a lot of direct work. In that case, a pull-up makes a lot of sense to be a larger focus for you. No argument there. But that's where we come over to the case of looking at the overall balance of your program, what you're trying to do. The other hand, what about someone who's trying to be a bench specialist? They really want a massive bench press and they need that upper back. There can be a reason to put some serious focus on rows in that case. Keeping in mind, rows are a better overall back developer than pull-ups. Okay? Meaning if we're counting the erectors, the traps, all of that, right? If we're counting all of that. For purely the lats and your whole middle back, pull-ups are probably a better exercise. Very hard to beat. Full range of motion, stretch pull-ups from a dead hang. Getting real strong at those, meaning even your rep count. Show me a guy who can do 20 dead hang pull-ups who isn't a little skinny 120-pound guy, right? Show me someone with a substantial grown man's body weight who can do 20 dead hang pull-ups. He's going to have lats every single time. So this is not a question of either or. It's a question of you should probably do a little bit of both, unless the balance of your program and your goals requires you to focus on one more than the other. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.